sorry if I appear nervous and if I start stuttering and sputtering because I'm in such exalted company, and it's such a privilege for Lady Noon to come here and spend time with us. And as you know, everyone knows all about her, but as she says, she's worn several hats. She's been an author, you know that author of course, and journalist. She used to do a column in India Today. She's done a book, she's done a TV series or a movie, Curry Tiffins, which was the history of India through food. So then isn't that very good?
Yeah.
Yeah, and it was such a unique thing. Calcutta has this whole thing about how Mughlai food came here and adapted itself in Calcutta. So similarly, thank you for coming and spending time here. And of course, people know Sujata Sen. She's Future Hope CEO, and she's also from the British Council. And hope we'll have a great discussion. Of course, this, as you know, is Prabha Khaitan Foundation, 3-2, and Shri Cements. Thank you for making this whole afternoon happen. So please.
Warm welcome to Lady Kent, Lady Mohini Kent or Lady Noon. We are very happy that you've been able to make it to Calcutta after many years. And of course, you've come with your new book, The Black Taj, which I have just finished reading. And I got it a couple of days back, and I thought that I may not be able to finish reading it, but actually it was so interesting and so exciting and that I was able to read it at one go. And I could use the telegraph, in fact, catchword for it was actually unputdownable. So, so it was in fact my pleasure to be reading this over the weekend. And thank you for writing a beautiful book like this, which has got, I think, essentially all the ingredients of a very good film, if I may say so. But before we talk about the different ingredients and why the film, etc., may I just ask my first question, which is probably the obvious question, is why have you called this book The Black Taj?
You see, this whole thing about the Black Taj, there's no evidence that something like this existed, because we've all grown up with this legend that Shah Jahan meant to build himself a black mausoleum in black marble like Mumtaz is white, and that it would have been, on the other side of the river. And surprisingly, the river hasn't changed its course in 500 years. And but there's no evidence of it. And I talked to Rohina Grewal, who's written historical books on the Taj and the Mughals and all, and she also has not come across any evidence. So I'll just read out this passage, because Simi is saying that that's probably where Simi is the main character in this novel. She said that's probably where the Black Taj would have been. Shah Jahan's black marble tomb like Mumtaz's white. That's love. And Dr. Imran Chaudhry, she's with him in Agra, and he says, I could tell you legends you've never heard of, but to me the Black Taj means something else. Shah Jahan, I was told, would have built it had his son not overthrown him, but who knows. Instead, here's my theory. The Black Taj is nothing but a fantasy, a dream. We've all heard about it, so it's become part of our dreams too. It's my dream, your dream. It can be whatever we dream. So it's a legend, it's a myth, and it's grown in our minds over the years because we've heard about it. The Taj Mahal itself is a very beautiful creation. I mean, when you go and see it, you realize that none of the images that you've seen match up to the reality, and it looks very light and ethereal, although there are tons of marble there. And so it's caught the world's imagination because it's one of the most famous monuments and one of the most famous buildings in the world. Similarly, I think the Black Taj legend has caught our imagination, but there's no proof that it would have happened.
Do you want to tell us a little bit more about your influences in India, your growing up as a woman, your watching other women grow up in India?
A book is a novel. It's never really personal. It's too long a project. I mean, this was my third draft, and it took a very long time. It wasn't written this year. So the characters are never entirely people you've known, because they have to take on a life of their own. But I think I've always been very connected with India, and I work in women's issues, which I have done for almost 30 years. But more specifically, in the past 10 years, it's anti-trafficking work, and obviously most of it is to do with women. And it's bad enough, I mean, the Women's Project is really about 50 years old, since the time of the women's lib. And, it's been a man's world for 5,000 years before that. So it's changing only because we are now living in knowledge economies, where it's not brute strength that rules the world. Therefore, women are coming up. I mean, look what happened in Britain. We had Brexit, and just before that, Theresa May was the Home Secretary for 6 years, and I admire her because she takes a tough stand. And suddenly, it was she wouldn't have, if someone had told her, or even on the 20th of June, that within a month she'll be Prime Minister, she wouldn't have believed it. But she is Prime Minister. We got Angela Merkel in Europe, and we might have Hillary Clinton in America. On the other hand, we are named after, my charity is named after a 4-year-old girl who was sold into a brothel. Now, when you're illiterate and you're poverty-stricken, and even the older girls, they don't know the world beyond their village. Imagine being suddenly transported to hundreds of miles away to some brothel. You don't know what's going on. Or being sent to Africa, or Nepalese girls being sent to Mysore, or, which happens all the time. So I think, it's, they just need to be given a helping hand. And I think it's not just women, it's naturally the men, because we're part of the same world. And we have to just work together, because somebody said that nobody is free until everybody's free. So it's not my freedom, because I'm not free until that, that 4-year girl is also free, because she's trapped in some terrible circumstances, but we are part of the same human energy. Well, I'll just introduce this. This is quite early on, when Simi, who's the main character, she's 25 years old, and she lives in a mythical town of Atmapuri, which could be a city in UP, or, and she lives at home with her parents and her grandmother. Her grandmother, old Mrs. Bhandari, is, suffering from, can't forget the partition, because she adored her father and he lost everything. So she can't even bring herself to say the word Muslim, and she calls them Ems. And, but it had been a difficult time for Simi. In the year since she turned 17, her grandmother had become obsessed with marrying her off. Anjora's engagement had made it worse. Now, her first cousin Anjora has just got engaged to a very suitable boy. And so she and her grandmother alone at the breakfast table, and her grandmother said, "You should have gone first." "Gone where?" Simi responded, deliberately misunderstanding. And she said, "By now you should be the mother of 2 children. You're almost 25. Look at Anjora, and she is a year younger." Simi bit sharply into her toast, and she knew that the next sentence her grandmother was going to blame her mother, who was her daughter-in-law. I mean, that's again the old story of mother-in-law, daughter-in-law. I mean, you could live in a family for 40 years and still not be accepted, It's really pathetic. Sorry?
Irony of life.
So Simi said, "Do you really blame Mama?" Old Mrs. Bhandari raised her eyebrows, which she had lost long ago to the heat of a faulty lamp. They had been replaced by black pencil lines, which the family had learned to use as a barometer of her mood. On good days, on bad days, they were drawn short and low, like flags at half-mast. On good days, they soared like kites in the heaven. So grandmother continued, "Listen, Miss Hoity-Toity, the Sharma boy is here from England for the wedding. They're good people, Brahmins. And the girl who marries him will be a Kismat Wali. Good job he's got in England, earns well, I hear. He even owns an apartment. What more do you want? Do wear something decent, child." So, Simi is quite rebellious. She doesn't want, she wants to meet somebody, but where is she going to meet someone? Because she doesn't work. She sits at home and reads books and has a comfortable, affluent, family and life. So, where is she going to meet somebody? So there's again a conflict. And then, her mother is also never been really quite accepted in the traditional way by...
And you also have death in the book. And in fact, I almost wish that you didn't kill off one of the characters whom I liked quite a lot, actually. I thought he is a very interesting character, a lot of potential. Why do you introduce death and, in fact, such violent deaths?
Death is inevitable in life, and I think at least in the Indian tradition and in the Buddhist traditions and all that, especially in Buddhism, they explore death. The adepts, and because there's a lot of tantrism in Indian Buddhism, and I'm part of the International Buddhist Confederation. It's a world body of Buddhism based in Delhi. I'm the global envoy in the UK. But I'm a non-practicing Buddhist. Having said that, I've just written a book on Buddhist philosophy. But they actually go into death because that helps you to lead a better life, because you live with this awareness that life is finite. Otherwise we think it's just going to go on forever. We need more money, we need more clothes, we need more jewels, and it's never going to end. And people will do anything. They even sort of lie and cheat and, to make their way. So death, and it's one of the last frontiers, I think, of human consciousness, and it's just one more step in life, because our rishis and munis have always told us about evolution of the soul and spirit. I mean, if there is a soul, there is a spirit, because the body is animated by something.
So I work for a charity now. I'm interested in knowing a little bit more about your charity work.
I've worked in some sort of charity or the other for almost 30 years, but it was more medical and educational. For example, we used to do, my mother was very active in those days, so she would do all the stuff on the ground. We did medical camps in something called Golden Jaipur Hospital in North Delhi, because they offered us the facilities that we won't charge, and the doctors also were free, so we paid for whatever else. And there's a big catchment area of villages, because I think life when you're the urban poor is probably a lot worse than it is in villages, where you at least have, a home and you have open air and all that. But, to live in slums, it's quite dehumanizing, people living in single rooms. But about 10 years ago, a friend of mine who was a very senior government officer in the Ministry of Women and Child came to me and she said, we've done some work earlier for an orphanage in Chennai and all, and she said, I'd like you to do something in this field because it's really desperate. And I can recommend projects to you that I have tracked. Because that's the other problem, in India. There's so much fraud in this area that you have to be very careful where the money is going and it's being properly deployed. And so for the past 10 years, I've been doing anti-trafficking work. And they say there are about 28 million slaves in the world. Half of them are in India, about 14 million, which includes everything, indentured labor and domestic and all that. Not necessarily children in brothels, but we are not a very big charity, but so we concentrated on this, and prevention is a very large part of our work, because we are named after a 4-year-old girl who was sold into the brothel in Delhi and rescued subsequently. So we help to run sheltered homes because they have nowhere to go back to. We support a school in Rajasthan, in Bharatpur, which they don't need us anymore because we have put them on their feet. But that is prevention. It's a catchment area of 40 villages with a population about 15,000.
Does anybody have a question? Yes, please.
I have to say this is a very moving book. And
Thank you.
Since you mentioned that the factors are not necessarily from your personal experiences, they're taken shape. Yeah, so the grandmother's views on karma are not necessarily what you share, because she says here that each person has to go through his or her own karma. Since you are so learned with the Japanese philosophy, and so What are your views on karma? Do you think our karmas are interlinked? Or what are your views on this?
See, the personal and collective karma, my views are the Indian view. It's the views of the Vedanta. There are some karmas that you can mitigate. There are some which you cannot, even your guru cannot. I mean, I suppose murder is one of them. But we are at a very unique point in our history, spiritually speaking, where you can change a lot. Because our consciousness is much more aware. Our ability, we have access to a lot more. We've got rishis, we've got teachers who can help us. So, but you have to do it and start now, because it's like if you want to, I don't know, take a degree in maths or something, you work very hard for it. And you can't do it without that doing your homework. This is the same thing here. So there are, it's a very apathetic point of view to say I can't change anything. You may not be able to change 100%, but you can change quite a lot.
Firstly, I'm Srila.
Hello.
And I really enjoyed reading your book.
Thank
what
you.
I wanted to ask you, or rather sort of comment on it, like your views on, you show very strong, it's like 3 generations of women, the grandmother, the mother and Simi. I found it interesting that you showed very strong minds, the grandmother clinging to the past, but Simi in her own way is equally sure that she wants to marry Dr. Chaudhary. There's no kind of confusion there. So is that a sign of optimism, and what is your take on this evolving new Indian women? Because here, though she is, that there's that surety that she does want to marry Dr. Chaudhary, but she's kind of torn that she has to again please family and please society. So what is your, because you were making that comment about Britain and India, so this dependence on family and society, it has its positives, but at the same time constantly trying to please, how do we resolve that?
Well, in India, families are very important, and that is a great support system also. I mean, and people don't abandon the old people. I mean, and children are very well nurtured. They're loved. In India, children are really loved. India as a culture, we love children, babies and children and all that. In West, especially in England, because I've lived there since the age of 21, the family structures, the family relationships are not so warm. So people are very lonely. And there's a certain coldness, and there's a certain lack of sacrifice. Like, I'm sure you all would sacrifice a lot for your mothers. You won't abandon your mother, and even if it meant giving up some of your work and whatever. But it's a different attitude. The only thing is it can be quite stifling when you're not allowed choice. Because I think we have a great more personal freedom these days through education, through evolution, through opportunities. And the internet is certainly, level the playing field quite a lot, because when I was a student, I was a member of British Library and SOAS and all that, and you had to go there, get a book, get it photocopied. Now you click a button on Google and you get the same research. Now with so much information, so much mental, intellectual empowerment, it's very hard to just give in. But the happy medium is somewhere in between, because I think there's to say, oh, this is my life, which people, younger people especially like to announce. It doesn't work that way.
Thank you, Lady Kent. Not only have you written beautifully, you've spoken beautifully. Thank you so much.
Very much for being here.
I invite Mr. Mangur to come and present on the letter.